we are. We're back. Finally back. I'm here. I'm back in Kentucky, only at a different place now. I'm at the Eastern State Hospital. And I'm here with my fellow journeyman of the soul, Nick Iafrate, the man, the myth, the legend.
It's good to see you again, sir. It's good to see you again.
Yeah. It's great to be back. Doing videos and stuff. I've been out of it for a minute because I was moving. So, but today, one of my subscribers put in the question of, put it, it's a good question. It's a lot of folks, they have a hard time getting access to care, and that's a big problem, which I, of course, can't fix by myself. But the question was, what can we do about depression and anxiety if we can't get medications? Like, what are some things to go through and do? And I thought, that's a really good subject to get into, to take a break from all of our superheroes and fantasy stories and all that kind of stuff. But it's all connected, right? So the imagination is a part of that too. But I wanted to I have a couple of discussion questions. I'm gonna get your thoughts on this. In your opinion, what is anxiety and why does it exist? How would you answer that? Because we can't know what to do about it if we don't know what it is, right?
Yeah. I wasn't expecting you to ask me that, but I'm glad you did. No, I think we've talked about it privately and publicly, right? And it's something that I've taken after from you, learning on my own, and then being in school, discussing it with fellow classmates and professors. But it's mostly been a conversation around what is anxiety presenting to you, to ego consciousness, right? And what is the purpose? Right. I think, I think it's best to describe anxiety in terms of maybe what it isn't, which is today this kind of modern understanding that it's this purely negative thing. It's something that we need to do away with. I think it's a signal from the unconscious. It's a signal from the psyche that we're not doing everything that we could be doing in terms of adaptation to a certain degree.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A couple of finer nuances on that, though. So for one thing, an organism that never feels anxiety isn't going to live very long, right? So just imagine when we're going through these questions, it's often useful to ask yourself, okay, well, what would happen if this didn't exist? So, one question I often ask when we're talking about guilt, I work with a lot of patients that deal with excessive guilt. And if you think purely negatively of that, you might ask yourself, well, how come we can't just get rid of it, right? But would we really want to get rid of all of it? Because we had a whole society of people that never feel guilt about anything. I don't think we'd have a society for very long, right? So guilt is functional. It exists for a reason. The trick is how much of it, right? And is it appropriate? And that's where we come in, right? The mismatch is often what we're really dealing with. Same thing for anxiety. The problem is when we're feeling anxiety when we really don't need to feel anxiety. And it can be very difficult to convince our feelings that they don't need to be feeling that way, right? That's our message, like you say, from the unconscious that says, you're in danger, you're in peril, you need to be on guard. Sometimes that's an accurate assessment. Like if somebody pulls a gun on you, it would be fully functional to feel anxiety in a situation like that, but other situations, not so much. So maybe this is a tougher question, but same thing regarding depression. What do you think depression is and why does it exist?
Well, something I took away from you, reading your book and your works, I mean, it was kind of, when I think of depression, I think of cold and I think of isolation. And I think of this kind of receding in. And I think depression can be equal parts adaptive and maladaptive, right? I mean, a grief-stricken depression is the kind of, there's the absence of the other, the absence of something that filled your life and that was very fulfilling, whether it be romantic love or a familial member or a friendship or even a certain location. So I think depression, like anxiety, it serves a function in terms of the psyche. I think today there's a lot of misunderstandings around depression. and misunderstandings and a convolution between sadness and depression, right? Those intermingling things. But when I think of depression, I think of isolation. I think of almost a receding inwards. If that's reified in a certain direction, it can be really detrimental. But again, like anxiety, it serves a purpose.
Right. And the real pathology doesn't come in because anxiety exists. The pathology comes in is when it's not matched with the environment correctly.
Mm-hmm.
When there's too much of it or not enough of it. Now, we don't normally talk about hypo-anxiety because those people don't come in to see us, right? They're just cruising along. They oftentimes wind up in really high intensity, high risk, high reward sorts of jobs. You know, like I think there's some studies, I vaguely remember some studies talking about fighter pilots having a much lower baseline level of anxiety when you give them like personality inventories and things like that. Like they got nerves of steel, right? And that's why you would do something like that because it doesn't, it's not so toxic to you. You don't feel like you're going to die every 5 seconds if you're just cool as a cucumber when you're going through that. Well, of course, the flip side of that is, everything's a trade-off in evolution. And if you don't have very much anxiety, you're going to be prone to more needless risks. And, so that's the flip side of it. You're never going to take needless risk if you have high anxiety. Of course, you might also have a hard time enjoying life too, so that's the trade-off. But it's real important to think of this as it has a purpose and a function and a meaning. It's not just empty, pointless suffering for no reason. So now, before I get into the 5 things that I want to maybe review that I think you can do that can help with these things that don't have anything to do with medications, I do need to talk about medications for a second. And the fact that our instincts and our emotional states can be sometimes mismatched to the environment is why medications need to be a part of our repertoire. Because think of it as like the fever. A fever response is, again, it's another functional response to fight off infections. A lot of viruses and bacteria have a harder time replicating when the body temperature is higher. So it's one of those things that evolution says, okay, there's something ain't right here, fever. All right, it's kind of like if you've ever read the Dragonlance novels, right? Have you ever read those? So There's this great character in there named Fizban, whose idea to solve everything is to throw a fireball at it. Right? Same idea, right? It's all connected to fantasy naturally. Hey, this is the Imaginarium.
Yeah, right.
So that's the fever response, like, oh, blast it with fireballs, right? Now, fevers can cause a whole lot of problems, right? If they go on for a long time and they're excessive, you can really do a lot of damage with them. But it must be the case that it helped more often than it hurt, and so we have that reaction. But a lot of times it's a very all or nothing kind of primitive, reflexive kind of response, and it's oftentimes mismatched to the pathogen. And so that's where medications come in, is when that's going on. And we can see it, we can recognize that, okay, their fever's 106, that's probably not helping anything. We need to get that fever down. So we give them medications. Same thing for anxiety, same thing for depression. These may be naturally occurring things. We all have natural vulnerabilities to anxiety and depression because of this stuff. But sometimes it's just excessive, and no matter how you try to outthink it, it still is driving you bonkers, and there's no good reason for it, right? You're just anxious, and everything's really fine. Now, you can't tell an anxious person that because they don't feel like everything's fine, right? And that's the art of therapy, is helping them to see and question those feelings. It's part of it. But not to treat it as the enemy, so that's the more depth psychology approach to it. But medications do help if you can get access to them. But obviously sometimes you can't. But I'm just saying, though, that it's a part of the picture, but it should not ever be thought of as the whole picture. All right. So, I mean, obviously you're not going to disagree with that. So, right. So, so my first thing about depression and anxiety in particular, and you really are right there in your discussion of it, is that a lot of it is very social in nature. So humans are social animals. We've got strong social instincts. And when we are not embedded in a social structure of some kind, we are not happy. We're just not happy. And I think we can try to analyze that ad nauseum, but at the end of the day, it's evolutionary. It's I think it's an inborn tendency that we have to want to be a part of a social network of some kind. I think there's quite a bit of nuance to that I'm going to get into. Thoughts so far on that?
Well, as you were talking about fever, I was thinking about like just inflammatory responses, right? And how a simplistic kind of analogy for somebody who exercises a lot, right? They have delayed onset muscle soreness. And there is like lactic acid goes up. There is an inflammatory response. There's more blood going into the muscle tissue that's been broken down. And if they were to take, let's say, a anti-inflammatory, an NSAID or whatever it is, it actually would decrease the amount of muscle repair needed because you need heat shock proteins in the area, right? So as you're talking about, again, like anxiety and depression, I almost look like it's a homeostatic response to a certain stimulus or situation.
That's right. Yeah, well, fever is an inflammatory response, and oftentimes inflammatory responses can be primitive and clumsy and all or nothing. You know, they're not super sophisticated, but not always. But that's another good example is that delayed soreness. There's a reason why it is there, and this is really important, I think, to recognize. In psychology, we are still, I think, struggling to recognize that there's two major explanatory ways that we need to look at things. So on one hand, you can say, okay, I got muscle soreness because of buildup of lactic acid. Okay, that explains how it happens, but it doesn't explain why it happens. Right. So another good example would be like eyebrows. I think I've talked about this sometimes before. Sure, we can explain exactly how they come about, but that doesn't tell us why do we have them in the first place? Well, what's the functional significance? All right. So there's the proximate mechanism, and then there's the ultimate mechanism. Right. So the ultimate explanation, or the ultimate cause of it, is the evolutionary cause. This is why it survived a zillion generations of natural selection, because it has a function. So what we're really getting at here is the function of these symptoms. What are they trying to do? And this is extremely important in depth psychology, because we're always asking that. Like, what's the point of this behavior? What are they trying to accomplish here with this unconscious, reflex or image or dream or whatever it is? These are all things that the psyche, the body, are trying to do to solve a problem that it detects in the environment. A lot of this goes on under the radar. So this is why I think that a lot of anxiety and depression centers around, it's not entirely social, but it's mostly social. I think just as a simple fact that we're humans, and our main survival strategy is social networks and cooperative behaviors, that doesn't happen by accident. So again, we can look at the proximate mechanisms and say, well, we meet people and we like them and we worry about what they think and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't explain, well, why do we do that in the first place, right? There's a million ways we could have been behaving. We could be just like tigers that roam in the jungle by themselves and don't give a crap about other tigers. But we're not tigers, right? So I say that all the time. But I think you can break down our social instincts into 4 main branches. And this I go into in this book that I'm working on now. Hopefully we'll be able to see that come about near future. It's under review currently. But the first one is going to be your social connection to a significant other, whoever that might be. And we invest quite a bit of emotional energy into this. Now in our culture in the US and the Western world in general, I think we put probably way too much emphasis on this, but it's because we lack the others. All right. So what are the others then? So most people know about that significant other, whoever that is. Like, I'm trying to find them, and as soon as I find them, I'm trying to keep them, and I'm trying to, really, I spend all this energy worrying about them. That derives from the fact that we are co-parent. That's really the ultimate source of that. If we didn't co-parent, if both parents didn't contribute to the offspring and invest heavily in the offspring like humans do, there would be no reason for that emotion to be there. So that's why it's there. So if you don't have it, you're going to feel that, right? People feel lonely and all this kind of stuff. But that's only one kind of loneliness. There's three others, I think. And this is coming from the research that went into this this book that I'm working on. The second one is friends and family network. So close friends, people that you feel comfortable enough to share embarrassing information with, right? That kind of thing, that kind of contact. People crave that. And if they don't have it, they're going to feel depression and anxiety symptoms. That's why there's all this drama surrounding that whole situation. There's frequently a lot of drama going around that. And therapy involves a whole lot of talk about that stuff and the significant other relation. The third one of these is community. So like the larger tribe of which I belong to. Now, in ancient times, that was simple. Like you were this kind of tribe. You were whatever that is. So that was dealt with quite concretely. In the modern world, though, we have lots of different tribes that we kind of belong to, and it's very complicated. And I think a lot of times people can still feel alone in that and lonely for that. Sometimes we use ethnicity or political beliefs or, a common goal towards like some kind of big charitable mission or, ideologies. We use all these things to satisfy our third craving for community. And then the fourth one is, those three come from the research on this. And the fourth one comes from a different set of research that people haven't connected to this, but I'm making the connection. So it's with nature itself. It's with feeling like you're a part of the universe, the natural world. And you can't do that unless you go out there and spend time in it. And I really think there's a lot of research that shows that people that really hardly spend any time out there don't do as well as people that do. Isn't it? Interestingly enough. And again, all of this that makes perfect sense evolutionarily. So that's one. Work on those four. That's one thing you can do. And it's not going to be easy, right? It isn't. It's never easy. Nothing's ever easy, right? Well, what do you think about that particular one? What would you add to that?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I remember specifically as kind of having this discussion around this one, the four and the one, when we were hiking and out in nature and discussing kind of shared values in terms of a naturalistic evolutionary understanding of the human being, right? And I think it's really important to find those things. And I think you're right. It for someone who might feel as though they're in that place or they are experiencing that place of depression and anxiety, it might feel as though that there is this block or wall that they have to kind of climb over. And I almost you ever see those like ruck races or Spartan races and things like that? They always have one obstacle there, and it's always this huge wall, and there's no way one person can climb up it alone. Like there's just no way. So you have to pretty much, with a group of strangers, create this chain of people to literally help every single person up that's doing the entirety of the race. So at one point in time, you might have 300 people doing this race, but there's this kind of amalgamation, this conglomerate of people just built up on this wall, helping everybody up. And I think that's it's really what's at the core of it in terms of socialization, is that, you need to go down to the world, and it might seem hard. It might seem you might be climbing up this wall by yourself, but really there's so many other people that are doing it too.
That's a really interesting, visually vivid kind of way. Not all species of animals would do that.
No,
they would just never get over the wall. But we do, and that's a great example of why we do it, because it works, right? We're really not all that great at a whole lot else, but that kind of thing we're really good at. Well, we're good at throwing things too. Humans, in the primate kingdom, we throw really well. We're not as strong as the others, though, for the most part, except for the small primates. Like chimps are a lot stronger than humans, but they can't throw for crap.
Oh no.
But they are very social, right? So that's deep in our history. It's not just Homo sapiens, right? It goes back further down the hominid lines. But all that aside is just showing that these four types of social connection, I think, have individual slots, right? And if they are empty, you will feel it. and you would not be happy. And it's because of our instincts are saying, this is not a safe place for you to be in. That's why it feels so unsafe and feels so empty and horrifying. It's because you're not connected. And it's surprising to me how often we miss this, right? There's a lot of research talking about loneliness problem, but not a whole lot talking about, well, I shouldn't say that. There is quite a bit of discussion about why that is and why it's such an epidemic now in the Western world, especially. And it's because a lot of our social ways that we do things are not particularly healthy, but that's a different conversation. Anyway, for the individual person just trying to get through the day, you have to sometimes push through that wall and say, I'm going to talk just a little bit more with some of these folks, reach out a little bit more. And it's going to be scary because the opposite of this is the rejection fear. And both of those things are kind of doing this, and loneliness a lot of times has this downward spiral where you are afraid to trust anybody. And so then you don't reach out, and then you feel abandoned, and then you're going down the tube. And that's a great way to lead to suicidal ideation. One of the things I preach the most is that most of the time, people that have suicidal thoughts don't really want to die. And I know that there's some mainstream psychology folks out there that would strongly disagree with this, but I'm sorry. I don't agree with that. I don't think that they really want to die. I think what they want is to stop feeling this pain. And that's the only thing they got, right? Those coping strategies are not very good. And I see this kind of stuff all the time. And once they feel reconnected and reestablished, that stuff goes away. Well, that's not an accident. Where did their desire to die go? Right? Well, it's because it doesn't emerge for no reason. It emerges because I'm feeling this horrible pain. I don't know what to do about it. And that's the only thing I got. I can think maybe I'll shoot myself. But then that explains why there's so much ambiguity and so much inner conflict about that. Because there's a lot of instincts that are like, wait a minute, dying, that's kind of final, I don't know about that, and that's butting up against this, but this is the only way I know how to escape the pain feeling. And so you got all this conflict. But the source of it ultimately are these social instincts, I think. Starving any of these will lead to anxiety, depression. They'll lead to a lot of other stuff too that's not healthy, but we're focusing on anxiety and depression today. So so that's number one. So anyone out there are 3 fans, right? Do that. Number 2, go team. Number 2 is mental energy. Now, have you heard of this concept or talked about it at all? No? Okay. So it's pretty simple, but it can be quite powerful. I think mainly due to its simplicity. And it's just the recognition that we have a finite amount of mental energy that's analogous to our physical energy. We can't just run nonstop 24/7 for a week. People just can't do that. Well, there's a mental side to that. And when we are depleted in terms of our mental energy, we are going to be more likely to feel depression and anxiety. It's because our reserves are depleted. Our ego strength is weaker. The small things can really send us in a tailspin. And what are the things that deplete that? Well, poor sleeping habits, right? Bad diet, not exercising, not taking care of the social side of things. So managing that, it's very basic, and it feels like you're not really doing anything, but don't underestimate it. It's huge, I think. We talk about sleep hygiene, helping people with poor sleep. Insomnia is a horrendous problem in the Western world. We get too many lights and too many screens and too many distractions and endless, social media, and everything is on 24 hours a freaking day. Mm-hmm. If the world never sleeps, why should we? There's always something there that's going on. I can always get on Netflix, right? This is new. I grew up when there was actually the TV stations would sign off at the end of the day. They'd play the national anthem, and that would be it, right? That's all you get after that. Nobody's watching TV. Imagine, if you will, a world where there's not 24/7 TV and internet. Right?
I was at the tail end of that. Yeah,
exactly. So I remember it quite well. And that's probably not helping our mental energy. All that, what that means, I mean, these are not necessarily evils. That's just the way it is. But it means that responsibility for managing our mental energy and to turn the stuff off and to help us, turn out to regenerate, recharge your batteries on, is on us. Whereas in the past, well, the rest of the world's turned off. We might as well go along with it, right? I mean, there's nothing else to do. All the stores are closed, right? We don't have 24-hour Walmarts back in the day. No, but now we do. So you could always go. And then, as I've visited in other countries, it's the older way of doing things is still more common in, say, Ireland, for example. They don't have 24-hour anything. I think you'd ask them that and they'd be like, 24 hours, like in a row? What? Why? Don't you have homes to go to? Get out of here. So mental energy, right? That's a biggie. Number 2. Number 3, boundaries. Dun, dun, dun. What emerges when I mention boundaries?
Oh, I've talked about this so much. No, the need to establish where you're at and who you are, and where the world begins and ends, right? Like, and really, as kind of, we both want to cooperate in terms of, jumping or getting over that wall. We also need to establish healthy boundaries, healthy walls that allow us to kind of function ourselves. I mean, so many people I talk to, the issues that they perceive to have are based around a lack of boundaries with others in their lives. And just like you were talking about, like a conservation of mental energy, they feel like they feel like they're so drained, not only by all the things that you mentioned, which is spot on. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It just is the way the world is right now. But they feel drained because all of their energy is going towards the other or something else or someone else or a group of people or work or just not a prioritization of their own time and their own kind of recuperation. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And this issue emerges from the first issue in the sense that we've got this innate, biologically driven desire to feed these starving instincts. And yet, how do we do that without overextending ourselves, without obsessing about it and all this stuff? That's the challenge. That's where the boundaries come in. And, it's always the balance of the individual versus the group. And because we're social animals, we're never going to be able to escape this dichotomy, this challenge. And healthy boundaries is essentially figuring out the balancing point there. How much do I give? How little do I give? And we all can agree that giving of yourself is good, but is there no limit to that? Right? Now, there's certainly plenty of people out there who don't give anybody anything of themselves, right? They're very narcissistic and self-absorbed and all that sort of thing. So that's one end of the spectrum, but the other end of the spectrum is giving too much and never saying no or any of that. And a lot of that's driven by these instincts, right? They're craving that belonging so much, they're willing to go really beyond their means, or their idea of what they want from these relationships is just almost impossible to achieve. And so they're constantly in a perpetual state of catch up, and they're always feeling left out or, derided or abandoned or whatever it is, because the sites are impossible. They're impossible to meet. But they've convinced themselves for whatever reason that's the only way to satisfy this craving. And that's a challenge. That's a real challenge. And so it's just going to be, and all 4 of these is going to be in there, right? So the self versus nature, like how much of the world is I cut this out, it's me. I'm allowed to have my little spot, right? But then me versus the community. If the community is asking too much of me, which it often, can do, then I have to say, well, I can do this much. I can't do more than that. I hope that's okay. And then self and family, self and significant other. All of those things I see constantly. And it's not so much, it's the fact that they don't know what the boundaries are. It's a lack of definition. And we don't talk about this very much. We talk about how important boundaries are, but we don't talk about well, okay, what are they, right?
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's cultural, right? In the West, there are no rules, right? Everything goes and you just do whatever, right? It's all good. Well, the problem with everything being okay, it means that nothing's okay because I never know if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Words of wisdom. I stole that from somebody else, but never mind. Anyway. Um, so I think in most situations, if we grow up in a family where a lot of this stuff is well structured, we'll just absorb what is within our purview and what is not, and what is expected and what is not, and we'll just know it instinctively. We won't necessarily have it spelled out. But a lot of families don't work that way. A lot of families are, let's talk about this ad nauseum. Let's try to, just or there are no rules. Everything's inconsistent and there's constantly moving. A lot of patients like that. In some ways, I grew up in a setting like that myself. So I can really dig how difficult that can be to manage. It's tough, and it feels awful. And so it's a source of depression, anxiety. So figuring out with others that you trust what are appropriate boundaries is the best way to deal with this. People who are wiser and smarter and older, have been around for longer, it's a great way to do it. I mean, that's really how it's supposed to go. We absorb it from our families and our communities, but if you don't have that for whatever reason, or if there's a lot of chaos, you're not going to figure that out, but you'll still have the craving to know what it is. And so what you're left with is a question with no answer. That is not pleasing to the human soul. No. So that's the third one, boundary work.
Would you say that for anybody that's listening to this, ask yourself the question, where do I lie on that spectrum? Maybe is it that I'm too closed off from community, or am I too kind of malleable and those floodgates are just opened constantly?
Yeah, because people will drain you without even meaning to. You train other people that you're always going to be available for everything 24/7. Then they'll take advantage of that, right? It's not out of malicious, intent necessarily. It's just that, they're used to that and they got their own problems, right? They don't have time to try and sort out what your boundaries are. That's your problem, right? So it's not fair to just lump this on everybody else. I'm not suggesting you're saying that, of course, but yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question to say, where am I on this? And it could be different in different contexts. In some ways I might be too closed off. In other ways I might be too open and too sharing and too over eager and not withholding enough. And there's going to be a push-pull there always. We just got to accept the fact that it's going to be there, and our job is to try to manage it as best we can. But life is conflict, life is tension. Right. If there's none of that, then you got not life, which is death.
Right. Well, as you were talking, I'm reminded of I spoke to this woman recently, and we were just having a conversation, and she was more than willing to be consistently open for her job, specifically her higher ups, and it was completely just draining. She literally used the language of, she felt like it was almost vampiric. She felt like, I don't know why they keep on having this expectation of me. And I said, well, have you ever expressed to them that you feel this way, or have you ever expressed to them that you need your own time? And she's like, well, if I say that, I'm going to get fired. And it was almost like this kind of predisposition to believe that somehow instituting herself in her own life was going to lead to this complete rejection. And we didn't get into where that came from, but it does seem to be the case for a lot of people today, in terms of, I'm opening myself up to this facet of my life, but I'm closed off to this kind of other thing that I really want to do.
Right. And that's why therapy can be complicated and take a while, because you've got all these different complex issues going on at the same time, and trying to juggle it. So my next one is control and choice work, right? So this comes out of my interest in Stoicism and Zen and Eastern philosophies. And there's a common thread that running through all of that, which is that much of our anxiety and dysphoria emerges from a desire to control everything in our environment, when we simply can't control everything in our environment. It's kind of a wish that can never be fulfilled. And the ancients answered that question in that problem by saying you have to learn to let go of those things that you can't control. Now, it seems simple, and it is simple in principle, but the practice of it can be quite challenging. And it's because if I'm constant, all right, so I have a situation, say, where I'm always worrying about things that I can't change, like other people's opinions. For example, I can try, but then I can't control it, right? I can try to influence it, but I can't control it. At the end of the day, people are going to be how they are. But if I worry and endlessly about it, then it's all completely wasted effort, because I'm worrying about something I can't actually do anything about. Like it'd be like me worrying about what if a huge meteor collides into the earth and kills everybody. Okay, well, can I do anything about it? No. Well, then there's not much reason to spend any neurons on it, is there? No. But in less extreme instances, we often tend to overreach or try to evade control and responsibility. So that's the flip side of that. If you're like the person who is in a abusive or dissatisfying relationship will tell me sometimes that they just can't leave the other person. But of course, that's factually incorrect. Yes, you can. I mean, are there doors in your house? Can you operate them? Yes. Okay, then you can leave, but you won't. And let's explore that. All right. So it's opting. It's saying I don't have control over this, but I want to, and I spend a lot of time and effort chasing that. But then these other things over here, I do have control over. I give up too easily. I don't. I say, well, I just can't. When you can. But obviously, the real reason that they don't is because it forces them to face some emotions that they really don't want to deal with. It's very painful, and this is a tough part of therapy, is saying, but you gotta face this stuff, right? You gotta face the fact that in the aforementioned example, it could be that, say, this person is afraid that they'll be lonely or no one will want them if they leave. Person X, Mr. Wrong, and so. But they're still making the choice every single day and making that calculation in their head that staying with this person, as toxic as they are, is preferable to being alone. So again, a lot of this ties back to the social instincts again. We're there again. But it's more than that. It's other situations too. Like people that worry about, like, there's so much what ifing out there. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? The answer to that is say, okay, let's really look at the possibility. What if? Okay, so what happens then? Really look at that. Like, okay, what if I get fired? Well, I'll get another job, right? Just the example you gave. Yeah. If I tell them no, they're going to fire me. So, and I try not to get into the speculation of, well, maybe they won't fire you. Okay, because that really doesn't get at the heart of this. And the heart of it is, I'm afraid, and I'm not willing to take the risk. And once I get to that point, I bring the choice and control work into it and say, but you are choosing to make that choice. And are you okay with that or not? Is it worth the risk, maybe, to not be drained? Maybe it's worth the risk. I don't know. That's not for me to say. That's for you to say. So that's the control and choice piece of it. This is where I think the phrase "ego is the enemy" might come from, and there's a great book on this called "Ego is the Enemy." I think it's Ryan Holiday. But yeah, Ryan Holiday. He's very, very much into the Stoic philosophy. But the title's a little misleading. Ego is not the enemy, really. It's too much and too little ego is the enemy, because too little he talks about too, which is another really important piece of this. Accept what you can do and live with that. I mean, you might as well, because there really isn't any other viable option that I'm aware of. But it can be easy to overstep and inflate and expect more than you could possibly ever get. Like the people I was saying before with the social instincts that want They might imagine, well, I would give this person so much, and they might even do that. But the assumption is that other person feels the same way, or is even capable of that. Maybe I am, but that doesn't mean they are. And isn't that okay? I mean, we're different people. So if you're willing to meet them where they live, then that's the solution to that. That helps to maintain the bond and the connection without expecting impossible things from others. But underneath of that is an inflated desire. It's kind of I demand that it be that way, when you don't get to make that demand, sadly. Maybe if you had the one ring, you could.
Oh, forget it. Not even
Don't
then.
tempt me, Frodo.
Don't tempt me, Frodo.
Exactly. I dare not keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of that?
You see people like that every day. You see. I mean, I've experienced that with myself. I'm sure you have to some degree too.
Absolutely.
In terms of
It's
development.
a daily battle.
Yeah, it's like I wish, and it's almost like this preemptive. You wish that you could control this aspect of this part of your life, but understand. And I think this is. I think you're right. I think it's when this kind of stoic, egoistic philosophy is taken to such a direction, like discipline, responsibility, willpower. It's like I can have everything I want if I just keep on doing it and control this situation. And it's a very one-sided way of looking at the world. I mean, there's certain thoughts you can't control. There are certain images, your dreams, and I think just like developing a relationship with your psyche can be revealing in the lack of control that you have. It's simultaneously freeing, in my opinion, because it allows you to kind of say, well, what are these feelings that I am feeling that I can't control? What is it meaningful? How is it meaningful for me? I'm reminded of so many people in my life, and that I've spoken to, that just are so dead set on grasping at something and holding on to it until, and they're squeezing it, they're strangling it. And it's just like, maybe loosen your grip just a little bit, and maybe new things will happen for you.
Just going against their own goals by trying too hard. I've certainly done that myself once or twice. All right, it's a daily issue. It's a daily battle. It's okay. It's part of human experience. There's no way to escape this challenge of trying to do what you can and accept the result. So the last one is personal myth work. Right now, you like to say on your channel, live your legend. Share with my three audience members what that means.
It's less of a for me, it's less of a kind of look at all the legends that are in the world and all the myths and then try to embody that. It is live your life, and then maybe by the end of it, you can look back and you can see this legend that you've built throughout your life, right? It's no one else's but yours, right? Not in a kind of selfish way, but just look at the kind of the tapestry, the cornucopia of your life at the end of it and say, I lived it, right?
Yeah, no, I love that phrase because it embodies what the function of the psyche really is, which is to find meaning in the random crap that happens to us, right? And some of it's random, some of it's not random, but the point is that our minds are always worried about trying to make sense of it all. There's so much vast quantities of brain tissue are devoted to this very thing, right? So all the senses, their whole shtick is, I got this chaotic buzz of data coming into whichever modality, right? Sight, sound, taste, feel, whatever. I've got to make sense of it. Well, that doesn't stop at the sensory impulse level at all. There's processing of layers and layers and layers. Okay, what does this mean? What does it all mean together? Okay, what does it all mean when compared to what happened to me yesterday? What does it all mean compared to what happened to me 27 years ago? Always doing this. And that's what dreams are about. That's what memory does. Memory is about that. That's why emotionally significant events we can remember and we forget all the rest of the junk. Because we can't hold all that. The brain is not a computer, right? The psyche is not a computer. And I'm glad, because computers are dumb. It's so stupid, right? But and maybe someday they'll fix that. But right now, no, it doesn't function like that. It's very sophisticated and it's always seeking out meaning. So when you say live your legend, I like that because it's recognize the fact that there is a meaning to your life. And if you choose to say, well, nothing's meaningful, everything's crap, the nihilism that we were complaining about last time, okay, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you're right. I don't know. But you're not going to be a happy camper with that attitude because our minds and psyche, the brain, all of this is geared towards hating that condition.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things that say my social instincts are screaming and starving and I've got all this angst about it. Well, wait till you get a hold of, I feel like life is completely meaningless. Right? Wait till you get a load of that action because it's utter misery. Right? That's why you get some philosophers like Sartre who are just utterly miserable people, right? Because they've convinced themselves that life is utterly meaningless. And I'm like, you did this to yourself, bro.
Yeah, you did it to yourself, man. Yeah.
Dude. Yeah, right? I mean, you thought yourself into a miserable existence of empty black nothingness for all eternity.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry about your luck. I can't go there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just fooling myself, but I don't care. Right. At the end of the day, I can't know any more than anybody else. So I'm going to go with something that is functional, that I think aims towards health. And maybe I'm just creating the meaning myself. If that is the case, great. So be it. I don't think that's the case. I think there's a bigger picture.
Yeah.
But the fact is that you have to learn to live, as if there's meaning, as if there's some function or purpose or whatever it is. And you're on an exploratory journey to find it, whatever it is. Just that alone is very protective, I think, against depression and anxiety. All of these factors, of course, work together, and none of them is, I think, more important than the other, really. They're feeding into each other and they overlap too much for me to make that judgment. But, so just to kind of reiterate and wrap up, all right, so the 5 things that I'm saying that you can do to help anxiety and depression symptoms without medications, if you can't get a hold of any, or if you choose to not, avail yourself of that resource, target, number 1, your social bonds on all 4 dimensions. Don't leave any of them out because I think they're independent, honestly. Some of the research out there suggests that they might be. And if you're missing out on one, you're still going to be upset and not, content. 2 is mental energy work, mental energy management. Make sure you're replenishing your batteries. All right. And how do I do that? With basic physical stuff, but also with the number 3, boundary work, right? It's so easy to just deplete all your mental energy on when the boundaries are not there, or they're too closed off, or they're too wide open. Or you need a porous boundary. Once the arrow slits in it, maybe. Right. That's actually a terrible analogy, but anyway. It's only something there so I can attack people. No,
right.
Terrible analogy. Anyway, you get the idea. 4 is control and choice work. Really, really important. Like that's an ongoing thing, right? So pick up Brian Holiday's book. It's a good place to start. It's an easy read. Or other things like that. Zen Mind, Beginner Mind is another great one from the Zen perspective. Very similar principles at work there, though, is learning to accept the world as it is, not the way you think it should be. Right? You do what you can to improve your corner of the universe, and that has to be good enough. That's sometimes a tough pill to swallow, but there it is. And then personal myth work, right? The big picture. What is my life really all about? And it doesn't have to be an angst-ridden sort of thing. It can be because I think it's partially invented and also partially created or discovered, it's partially discovered. It's about half and half.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm half creating my meaning and I'm half discovering my meaning.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So there it is. Go forth
love that
and do
list.
those things. And go forth and do those things and be happy.
Yeah.
Or else.
That's a quality list, Dr. Goodwin. No, seriously, I think it's simple, but I think for anybody watching this, like seriously, take that, write it down and then evaluate it for yourself, because I think that in and of itself is meaningful, right? I think that
Absolutely.
in and of itself, discovering why you're feeling a certain way in terms of anxiety and depression, and then really evaluating that list of 5 can really be just, there's so much there. There's so much there to discover about yourself.
And
Yeah.
merely working on this
Mhm.
is the first step. Okay, so you uncovered one of my tricks that I'm doing there, which is I'll give you something to do.
Mhm.
That's a part of any therapy, right? So I'm really kind of incorporating a therapy principle there. But yeah, and then, you know, for our 3 listeners, right? Comment below what other things you want us to talk about, or maybe there's one of these or all 5 of these that you'd like for us to explore more.
Yes,
You
indeed.
know, we'll leave it wide open.
Love it.
All right.
Love it. Thanks, Dr. G. See you later. Bye, everybody.
Right.
Have a great day.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.